Ooh. So, Keir panicking. Nigel Farage's reform crushes Labour. Crushes Labour in new poll. Let's check this out. This is an interesting one from GB News.
Hi everyone, Matt Goodwin here at GB News. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now today I want to talk to you about a bombshell new poll that's causing quite a stir in British politics. This poll reveals some fascinating insights into why Nigel Farage and Reform UK are surging and what it means for the future of our country and our politics. Let's dive right in. Now, Reform UK, formerly known as the Brexit Party, has been making waves in recent months. You might remember at the general election back in July, Reform polled 14% of the national vote and won 5 seats in the House of Commons. Led by Richard Tice, this party was gaining steadily in the polls, particularly among disillusioned Conservative voters, among people who had voted for Brexit in 2016 and who care passionately about lowering immigration. But what's driving this surge today, since the general election, since Nigel Farage took over the party? Well, the latest polls give us some compelling answers. Now, a recent survey conducted by the very reliable, very rigorous Find Out Now polling company has revealed some startling figures. If we were to have a general election tomorrow, and remember the next one is 2029, the results would look something like this. Conservatives on 26% of the national vote, Reform UK in second place on 24% of the national vote, with Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour government in third place on 23% of the national vote, and the Liberal Democrats a distant fourth on 11%. Now let's pause and just consider what these numbers mean. Reform UK, a party that many in the Westminster bubble have openly dismissed and mocked, is now polling just behind the Conservative Party. In fact, it's within the margin of error of replacing the Conservatives too. And it's also ahead of Keir Starmer and the Labour government, meaning that if there was an election tomorrow, Reform UK would not just be walking away with 4 million votes and 5 seats, but would be causing enormous damage to both of the big parties at that general election. So why does this matter? Well, this is not just a blip or a temporary shift. The first thing to tell you is if you look at all of the opinion polls that have been done over the last month, then Reform UK have averaged over 20% of the national vote. That's on average up 6 points on what the party polled at the general election back in July. And what I think this is telling us, what I think this is showing us, is that we're in the grip of a fundamental realignment in British politics. We're seeing a significant portion of the electorate, 1 in 4 voters, particularly those on the centre right, particularly people who really care about immigration, who want to lower immigration, who want to control our own borders, who want an economy that works for ordinary people, are now looking for alternatives to the traditional big 2 parties. And it's really not hard to see why Nigel Farage and Reform are surging. Millions of voters out there, maybe you watching this video, feel let down and betrayed by the Tories. You've watched as a party that promised to take back control and lower the overall numbers has failed time and time again to deliver on the key issues facing this country, like mass immigration, like the lack of economic growth, like high taxation, big regulation, big woke ideology, people wanting to just preserve and promote their own identity, history and culture. So what's behind this surge of support for Reform UK? Well, the poll gives us some really clear indicators. Now, listen, I've polled Reform Party voters. I've done one of the biggest surveys of Reform Party voters. Their number one issue, immigration. Reform UK has taken a strong stance on reducing both legal and illegal migration, which resonates with many people out there who feel the current government has lost control of our borders. Just look at what we've learned over the last 2 weeks. Net migration in this country has surged to nearly 1 million people in just 1 year. In fact, last year, 1.2 million people migrated into Britain. That's enough to fill a city the size of Birmingham. And look at what else we've discovered just in recent weeks. If you look at all of the people who are coming into Britain now, who are migrating into Britain, 86% of them are coming from outside of Europe, from countries with very different religions, cultures, histories, and religions. And in fact, while many people in Westminster will tell you that those people are coming here to work, actually, only about 15 to 18% are coming into Britain on high-skilled worker visas. The second issue here is economic policy, with promises of tax cuts and a focus on economic growth. Reform UK is appealing to many of those struggling Brits, those hard-working patriotic Brits who simply feel overtaxed and underserved by the current economic policies. They're looking at public services, they're just not working. They're looking at their tax bills, their local council tax bills, and they're saying, hey, where's this growth you promised us? And if you look at the next 5 years, if you look at the longer term trajectory in this country, even the Office for Budget Responsibility has looked at Labour's economic plans and said, at best, they're going to produce growth rates of just 1.5%. This economy isn't working for ordinary working people. And I think thirdly, cultural issues. Reform UK has positioned itself shrewdly as a defender of traditional British values, appealing to many people out there who feel that rapid social changes, rapid demographic changes, mass immigration, woke ideology are eroding our national identity, our history. They're eroding our sense of who we are, the very essence of what it means to be British and English in these islands that we all call home. And I think also anti-establishment sentiment really matters here too. There is a growing, palpable distrust of the political, cultural and media elite in this country that for so long has failed to understand what ordinary people in this country are thinking and feeling. Now, Reform UK is clearly tapping into this by presenting itself as an outsider party, a people's army, it calls itself, which is willing to shake up the system and dramatically overturn the broken status quo. Now, this surge in support for Reform UK really does matter because it presents a huge challenge, not just to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, but also to the Tories who, remember, remain on life support. They're now caught in an extremely difficult position. If the Tories move to the right to try and win back those Reform UK voters, and remember, Nigel Farage at the last general election won over 1 in 4 of those Conservative Party voters, well then Kemi Badenoch and her party risk alienating more moderate centrist voters in the middle of the landscape. But if the Tories stay where they are, they could, and I would suspect they will, see many more of their traditional Conservative voters defect to Reform UK. It's a classic case of being caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's not clear how, if at all, the Tories will be able to navigate this challenge. The other thing I would say is look at what Kemi Badenoch has been doing since becoming leader of the opposition. Well, she's talked the talk on immigration, but she surrounded herself with the same old people who advise the same old Tory leaders. Many of Boris Johnson's advisors are now working with Kemi Badenoch, and at the same time, many of her shadow ministers, look at somebody like Priti Patel, for example, who oversaw the wholesale liberalisation of the immigration regime under Boris Johnson. These are the people who created the disaster and the mess that we see around us in this country that we love today. And what does all of this mean for Labour? What does the surge of support for Nigel Farage and Reform mean for Labour? Well, Labour is currently leading in some polls, but they should not be complacent because the rise of Reform could actually cause enormous problems for Labour. Yes, it may help Labour in the short term by splitting the right-wing vote, but it's not that simple, because Reform and the rise of Reform signals a much broader shift in the political landscape, a realignment that Labour will also need to address. If Reform UK continue to gain support in the polls, then it could force Labour to reassess its positions on issues like immigration, border security, cultural values and levelling up. They're going to need to find a way to appeal to both their traditional base and voters who might be tempted over by Reform UK's message. I mean, just look at one thing, for example. Do you honestly think the Tories are going to win the Red Wall in 2029? Do you honestly think the Tories are going to win Wales in 2029? Do you honestly think the Tories are going to win coastal towns up and down England or places like Kent and Essex? I mean, let's get real. It's going to be Reform that is going to be challenging Labour in those areas. And so fast forward to 2029, an unpopular Labour government, mass migration, a broken economy, maybe even a financial crisis, who knows? I suspect it will be Nigel Farage and Reform picking up the pieces in those areas, not the Tories, and maybe not Keir Starmer. This poll is not just about party politics, however. Let's look at the broader implications. It reflects deeper currents in British society. What we're seeing, and I've talked about this before, is a growing divide between those who embrace globalization, who embrace rapid social change, who embrace rapid demographic change, and those who feel left behind, who feel understandably, rightly anxious and concerned about these changes, and who want to preserve their traditional values and their ways of life. This divide is not unique to British politics. We can see it across the Western world. It's reflected in the re-election of Donald Trump, who tapped into this in America, but it's now being brought into sharp focus here in Britain by the rise of reform. It will be the reform movement that connects with working class, hard-working Brits and middle-class Brits who all feel that they've been left on the wrong side of these changes and that they are looking at an elite class in Westminster, in Oxford, in Cambridge, that doesn't really share their backgrounds, doesn't really share their values, and is now looking down on people like them. So what's next? Well, look, as we look into the future, there are several key questions that I think we need to consider. Can Reform UK sustain this momentum in the polls, or will their support fade as we get closer to the next general election? Remember, all political realignments are about demand and supply. You've got to have the demand from voters, but you've got to supply those voters with a credible and coherent message and organization and leadership. And I think getting those two things absolutely right and syncing and merging together is going to be critical for reform. Secondly, how will the Conservatives respond to this challenge from their right flank? We've already talked about the strategic challenges facing the Tories. Thirdly, will Labour be able to maintain their lead, or will they need to adjust their strategy in light of these changing dynamics? These are all questions that are going to guide the next 4 or 5 years in British politics. But what's clear today, as I'm talking to you in early December 2024, on the cusp of a seismic year in British politics, this poll is more than just a set of numbers. It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for the political establishment, for the broken liberal consensus in this country. It shows that millions of people out there are deeply dissatisfied with the status quo, with the policies that are governing their lives, and they are looking, they are searching, they are hungry for an alternative. So whether you agree with Reform UK's policies or not, their rise is a phenomenon that cannot be ignored. It is not going to be going away anytime soon. It's a sign that our political system is now in flux, is highly volatile. A two-party, once stable political system is rapidly making way for a highly volatile, multi-party system. Some really historic changes are now swirling around us. The old certainties no longer hold. So as we move forward, it's crucial that we have an open and honest debate about the issues that are driving this shift. We need to address the concerns of the millions of people in this country who feel rightly left behind by globalization and mass immigration, while charting a course that allows Britain to really thrive in the 21st century, to generate real prosperity outside of London, Oxford and Cambridge for ordinary hard-working people. This is a challenging time, but I remain convinced it's also a time of enormous opportunity, an opportunity to reshape our politics, to address long-standing issues, and to create a Britain that works for everybody. That's all for now. As always, I'll be keeping a close eye on these developments and bringing you my analysis right here on GB News as the situation evolves. Thank you for watching. Do not forget, subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel. Stay close to the information. Stay close to the counterculture. See you soon.
Well, subscribe to Only Facts Media if you want to get more stuff like this and react to it. Matt Goodwin is fantastic. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. But what the good news is reform are on the rise. Reform are on the rise, people. And I'll say it now, like I felt with Trump, I think they're going to win the next general election. I really do.